Scottsdale is world famous for its tourism, entertainment, shopping, climate, high-profile events, and golf courses. But on the outskirts of this sophisticated destination is a jewel of the city. Look to the northeast from downtown and you'll see the stately McDowell Mountains and the McDowell Mountain Preserve. The preserve is home to more than 60 mammal species, 350 types of birds, and at least 2,000 native plants. Though it is just 50% complete, its final size will total over 36,000 acres, making it the largest urban city-owned preserve in the USA. Because Scottsdale citizens twice voted yes to acquiring this land, which totals almost 1/3 of the city's area, a great legacy has been bestowed on future generations. Citizens and visitors both agree that the McDowell Sonoran Preserve is one of Scottsdale's most loved amenities. Ranging from rugged mountains to arid desert floor, the preserve offers a widely varied terrain and enough rainfall to support beautifully diverse flora and fauna. Owned, managed, and maintained by the city, with the help of volunteers from the nonprofit McDowell Sonoran Conservancy, as well as other volunteer groups, the preserve offers outstanding recreational opportunities for citizens and visitors. These include hiking, cycling, horseback riding on miles and miles of city and volunteer-built trails, as well as several challenging rock climbing sites. Protection to this present section of the desert is one of the city's highest priorities, but its accessibility makes the preserve an easy target for one of its biggest threats, invasive plants. Because there are sources of these plants growing nearby, outside the preserve, and because there are many ways to unknowingly bring seeds from invasive plants into the preserve. Invasive plants. Sounds ominous, doesn't it? Really, how dangerous can a plant be? Well, according to local weed biologist Dr. Ed Northam, pretty darn dangerous.
Invasive plants are characterized by, first off, being non-native to the area where they are causing problems. They also have traits, biological traits, that causes them to be perceived as pests. They cause either economic damage, environmental damage, or are problems to human health. So there's really two things that are needed to have an invasive plant, which is the first one being they're non-native to the area, and then the second is they have potential for causing trouble or some type of problem for human beings.
Plants are termed invasive because they have weedy traits that help them efficiently invade, persist, and sometimes dominate native plant populations. These invaders are very effective at taking over spaces and resources in the disturbed areas. Non-native plants that are invasive came here from somewhere else and have invasive traits.
The entire West, particularly on wildlands, are either infested or being threatened by non-native plants that have came from essentially other continents that have been established and then escaped and are now costing land managers and landowners millions of dollars to control or try to keep at least contained when they places where they can't totally remove them.
This quiet invasion poses threats on two main fronts. Habitat loss. Invasive plants rob native species of water nutrients, light, and space. This displacement of native plants and changes in the plant diversity result in a dramatically damaged habitat and food for native desert wildlife. Fire. Invasive plants magnify the fire danger by creating more fuel and decreasing the natural spacing among native plants. Unlike forests or African grass environments called savannas, the desert evolved without frequent wildfires. A desert fire leaves a long-lasting scar because the native plants never developed resilience to repeated fires. Over time, desert wildfires can transform it into a grass savanna that displaces native desert plants and leaves inedible food for native animals.
We're starting out today in the natural desert. This is what the environment should look like in the area that we've moved into. You'll notice as we're out here, the spacing that we have between the plants, the types and wide variety of plants that we have that allows them to be successful. This is what the typical Sonoran desert is supposed to look like. As we go through this program today, we're going to talk a little bit more about invasive species, wildland fires and threats to homes, and what we've done by moving into this area. And we'll give you some really good guidelines and identify some of the problems that we have, and you should be able to tell the difference between the natural area like we're looking at here and the areas that we've impacted with development. We're in an area that's been developed that has been completely taken over by invasive species. Surrounding me is some fountain grass, some buffalo grass, some desert broom. As you can see, the drainage area in this area is completely taken over and has dramatically increased the fire level and fire potential in these areas. The risk is higher to the homes, the risk is higher to our firefighters, and there's no way that our units and our resources can be able to get into these areas, address the fires adequately, and protect the houses and protect the structure. What happens is we need your assistance in these areas. We need you to identify them, we need you to help us clear these out, we need you to make them safe and give us the defensible space that we need.
50 years ago, 3 of today's most troublesome plant invaders, buffalo grass, fountain grass, and Saharan mustard, were not found in the Phoenix area. Today, these invasive weeds, among others, are widespread and continue to expand their habitat via wind, horses, bikers, and especially automobiles.
In order that Scottsdale become successful in its weed management program, we really have to depend heavily upon the citizenry of Scottsdale. The problem is way too big for just a small number of people, be they professionals or a small number of volunteers, to handle this problem. We need to get the citizenry familiar with the problem. They need to learn how to identify what some of these invasive plants really are, so that they can go to their homeowners association, to their landscape management people, and ask them to get the plants removed.
These are common plants that you might see in landscaped areas, but they're really not supposed to be here. These are invasive plants. They're growing less than a mile away from the preserve, but you'll see them pretty frequently in the communities throughout the neighborhoods. We have fountain grass right here. You see big clusters. This one's almost as tall as I am. Then you walk just a little bit further ahead, we have buffalo grass right in here, and it has a tendency to have very dense but maybe shorter clusters than the fountain grass. But you can see how they're really starting to take over this whole entire little segment of what was probably a landscaped median area that probably mimicked regular desert spacing, which meant that there'd probably not be so many plants in here, because in the desert the spacing is much wider because there's not enough water and moisture to go around. So the native plants will actually space themselves to accommodate what they need. But here's an area that's been getting landscape watering, it's been getting irrigation, but so, you know, the native plants that were supposed to be in here, there's an ocotillo right back here that looks like it's struggling a little bit, because right around it there's clusters of buffalo grass, we have the fountain grass in the area, and that might be actually robbing that plant of the moisture that it needs, while these other ones are obviously thriving and doing very well, growing tall and in large clusters and continuing to just seed out throughout the whole area.
With the help of local residents, homeowners associations, commercial nurseries, landscapers, not to mention the concerted effort by the City of Scottsdale and other committed volunteers, these invasive weeds can be controlled. Well, how can you help? Learn to identify the problem plants. Remove invasive plants from private property. Work with your HOA or landscape gardener to emphasize native plants in your yard and common area. Report infestations of common areas to your HOA or to the City of Scottsdale. Add these plants to your HOA's prohibited list. Learn how to correctly remove invasive plants. Join a recognized volunteer group like the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy, Volunteers of Outdoor Arizona, the Nature Conservancy, the Phoenix Weed Whackers, and get trained to help remove invasive weeds. Without action by our citizens, we risk severe damage to a substantial part of our children's heritage, the preserve, through a devastating fire, or to a slower but equally devastating decline in native plants and animals. The first job we must all do is to learn to identify these invasive plants that are threatening Scottsdale's preserve. Understand why they are serious threats to our desert and learn some simple but effective methods of removal. Remember, some of the invasive plants look very similar to our native plants, so educating yourself on the differences is critical to successfully eradicating them. Let's look at Scottsdale's list of targeted invasive plants, focusing on the 4 biggest offenders. The most troublesome invasive grass in our city is fountain grass. This attractive ornamental plant is sold in nurseries, found in many private landscapes, and is advancing steadily into the preserve. It has long, slender leaves that become lush and green in warm weather or when regularly watered. Fountain grass has long, feathery purple to white flowering stems. Unfortunately, its attractiveness adds to its threat, since many homeowners choose to landscape their yards with this invasive grass. Fountain grass initially becomes established in yards and desert washes, then spreads outward into rocky desert regions. It grows into huge clumps, even small rocky crevasses, making complete removal tedious and physically difficult.
This plant right here, it's called fountain grass. It's a very attractive plant. It gets huge, and each one of these seed heads has 200 plus seeds in it, and they're probably all viable. So, and when we have winds, this gets carried away and it goes onto the national forest. It gets caught up in tires or clothes or dog fur, and it's a problem for us because it gets in drainages, and when it dries out, it can carry quite a fire. It replaces a lot of natives. Some other strategies we've got are treating weeds they first show up along roadsides, especially coming from urban areas onto the forest. A lot of our weeds are coming from the urban areas of Phoenix, greater Phoenix. So we treat along roadsides, we treat weeds in campgrounds where you first see them. And then we are working with a lot of volunteer groups to do weed treatments, and also to help us have more eyes out there to spot the weeds so we can treat them early.
Manual removal of fountain grass clumps, which can be up to 6 feet tall, is carried out using large digging tools, preferably in teams of at least 2 persons. Seedlings are easy to pull up and should be removed as early as possible. Dig up large plants by the roots and carefully dispose of them so the flowering stems don't blow away. Dispose of the plant with large plastic garbage bags to prevent the seeds from escaping. The second very troublesome invasive plant is the only Sonoran desert native, desert broom. This bushy plant, almost always a deep green in color, quickly grows to about 10 feet tall, loves to quickly repopulate and dominate disturbed soils resulting from a new building construction, highways, or utility lines. You can see it almost everywhere, typically appearing in thick stands. In the McDowell Sonoran Preserve, competitor plants exist, so desert broom is fortunately more widely dispersed along peripheral roads and intersections. This bush burns fiercely, and the female version produces huge quantities of white fluffy flower seeds in the autumn season that can cover the ground like snow. Near homes, new plants readily appear among the ornamentals, and when close to swimming pools, the cotton-like wind-blown seed carriers can clog pumps and filters. Along roadsides where many fires start, large stands provide plenty of fuel for hot fires. The best way to remove this plant is seemingly simple. Pull it out. Small plants readily come out, especially when the soil is moist. However, larger plants have an extensive root system that includes a large taproot, making the extraction a big physical effort. Try a large digging bar and fulcrum to pry the plant out. Do not simply cut the plant at ground level because it usually just stimulates new growth with many more woody stems. The third plant on the list has become quite famous in Arizona lately, making headlines in Phoenix and especially Tucson: buffle grass. This warm weather loving South African grass is grown as animal forage in Sonora, Mexico, and Texas. In Arizona, it is a fire-prone invasive plant that grows up to 4 feet high with flowering stalks that can be purple, gray, or yellowy before turning a distinctive golden brown when dry. Infestations are heavy in Tucson and in Phoenix Parks and on Mummy Mountain. Although small colonies have been found in the preserve, most grass colonies in Scottsdale are found in empty lots and along roadsides. The seeds and new growth on this perennial develop quickly after rains. In other words, buffalo grass adapts well to drought. The seeds stick to surfaces such as shoes, clothing, and auto tires. For transport over long distances, wind is another way of scattering the seeds. Buffalo grass quickly crowds out other native plants and small trees. After a fire, new buffalo grass seedlings quickly emerge. This makes conditions ripe for multiple fires that will turn the desert with its many exotic plants into a savanna just awaiting the next fire. You can remove clumps of buffalo grass by digging with a large, sharp tool such as a pickaxe. For large clumps, well, you need 2 people, one to dig and the other to pull upward and maintain tension on the clump. Large clumps also come out more easily if you first cut off some of the grassy clumps and flowering stems on top to expose the root base. If you do, remove the top carefully and bag the flowering stems to reduce the spread of this grass. Well, if you ask the experts who study invasive plants in the West, what's the most noxious invasive plant you have heard about? Well, it's likely they would name our 4th troublesome invasive plant, tamarisk, also known as salt cedar.
I'm actually standing amongst a pretty well-growing patch of tamarisk, also known as salt cedar. This is kind of, again, in one of these areas. These houses along this roadway were built a short time ago, relatively, probably in the last 2 or 3 years. And these tamarisks really seem to thrive in areas where there's been recent disturbance of the soil. This particular case, there's some landscaping that had been done in conjunction with some of the houses being built in this area. But you'll see that all along this area we have a number of different salt cedars, varying sizes. We also have some desert broom right in here. And right behind me, literally right behind me, is the McDowell Sonoran Preserve. Again, these salt cedars, it's very important to learn how not only to recognize them, but how to take them out properly. These things are really, they're devils to get out of the ground, because this looks like a relatively small plant in front of me. But you try to pull this out, the root system grows so far deep and down into that ground, it's really, really hard to remove. And then you also need to make sure that you're very attentive to picking up all the little pieces of the branches that fall on the ground, because they can actually propagate from a trimmed branch. You don't want to just trim these back because you think if you cut them down they aren't going to grow back. If you actually prune these, they will come back bigger, better, and stronger than they did before. But and some of the plants in this area, some of them have the seed heads that are literally just draping down with thousands and thousands of seeds. And it doesn't take much, as you can kind of see from this whole example, to start creating this whole system of salt cedars that just keep marching further and further down the way.
Introduced early in the 19th century as an ornamental bush or a tree because of its beautiful pink flowers, it was later used for windbreaks on the Great Plains and soil stabilizers along the eroding western streams. Unfortunately, the problems caused by this plant were not foreseen. Salt cedar is a large bushy shrub that typically grows to about 12 feet tall. It has small leafy twigs and slender branches covered with small leathery gray-green leaves. Pinkish flowers cluster group at the end of the branches, and blooming occurs from January to October. Tamarisk grows quickly, outcompeting native trees by going deeper for water, so much so that the stands can lower water tables, causing loss of water in huge quantities through transpiration and evaporation. It also prevents many non-salt tolerant plants from coexisting in the same area by dropping leaves with high salt content. Large thickets from long streams eventually choke the stream channel, causing floods in times of heavy runoff. Salt cedar burns very hotly and rapidly recovers after fires too. You can easily spot large stands of tamarisk along the Salt, Gila, and Colorado rivers. It is a formidable enemy plant that many groups around the country are grappling to eradicate. But you may say, there are no rivers in the preserve. Why then are we concerned with salt cedar? Well, it's really quite simple. There are critically important desert riparian areas in the preserve and along major washes, near earth and water tanks, and in regions where springs exist. And there, salt cedar trees are often found soaking up the scarce water and crowding out native trees like the desert willow. These rare riparian areas are critical habitat for a wide range of native birds and wildlife. Experts note that while some birds use salt cedar for nesting and cover, it generally has lower wildlife value than native vegetation. Occasionally, you may see salt cedar trees used as an ornamental, and unfortunately, a few commercial plant nurseries sell plants to unknowing homeowners and landscapers. There are many beautiful native desert trees, and these should be used instead of salt cedars. Removing salt cedar trees is usually very labor intensive. In soft soils, where the trees are relatively small, they can be pulled out with a special leverage tool. Make sure that the root crown, which may be well below ground level, is removed too. Larger trees are best removed by using special herbicides applied by trained professionals. Cutting a tree at ground level just makes the problem worse because the tree quickly resprouts with many more trunks, making the next removal attempt much more difficult. There are 4 other invasive plants on the city's list of invasive, but they are less widespread and problematic at this point. One of these is the Sonoran mustard, sometimes called African or Asian mustard. These bushy plants grow very fast to heights of about 3 feet if water is available. Many seeds form and rapidly mature. Small pale yellow flowers appear from January to April. Woody and wiry, these plants form a dense stand, making it difficult for wildlife or hikers to traverse the thickets. Upon maturing, the plants dry and become a yellow-tan color, break off at the base, and become a form of a tumbleweed, using the wind to propel the plant to a new location where seed pods open and they start a new invasion. Malta star thistle is another invasive plant to look out for. This medium-sized thistle with bright yellow brush-like flowers grows up to 2 feet tall, often in dense impenetrable stands. It has thorns on the stems and sharp, fine thorns below the flower. The Malta star thistle tends to germinate and grow only in the spring. It is advancing mainly from areas north of the preserve and primarily seen in the northwest portion. Another invasive grass is red brome grass, a non-native annual from South Asia and North Africa. The grass turns maroon just before maturity. It has taken over large areas of North Scottsdale and is well established. This grass was one of the chief plants that fueled the Cave Creek combination fire in 2005. That fire consumed almost 250,000 acres of the Tonto National Forest land. In February 2006, red brome was the main fuel for the preserve's Lost Canyon fire, the earliest wildland fire ever in Scottsdale. The last of the 8 invasive weeds is the common Bermuda grass. A source of allergens, it is used in some lawns and as animal forage. It grows as thick mats, preferring areas where water is available, such as roadsides, desert springs, and other riparian habitat, all the while pushing out native plants. Dry Bermuda grass is an easy starter fuel for fires along roadsides and is hard to eradicate once established. If you are interested in learning more about these invasive plants, the City of Scottsdale offers numerous helpful resources. You can also contact the City of Scottsdale's Fire Department. It is proactively reaching out to residents about the dangers of these invasive plants and will do a presentation for your homeowners association or other private groups. To learn more about invasive weeds, go to any of these websites. And thank you for helping preserve the Sonoran Desert for future generations. I'm official Arizona State Historian Marshall Trimble, and I'm thanking you personally for helping preserve our desert.